I hope this testimony will serve as a warning signal to all who, at some point, have already considered to be aware of their own life. You can't imagine what's on the other side. The horrors that reside there go beyond any description, and the pain is incessant. Before proceeding with any such thought, I beg you to reflect. No matter the obstacle, there is always a solution, even if hidden. Any suffering here is passenger compared to what I witnessed. And the most disturbing, what I lived lasted only a few seconds. I can't even assume what it would be to face eternity in that abyss. It all started at the time I was still in high school. For those looking out, I looked like an ordinary boy, full of energy and always smiling. But inside those walls, my life has become a nightmare. A group of students decided to make myself hell out because of my health condition. I have chronic erythroderma since birth, which makes my skin peel and have a peculiar tone. For them, I was more than unfortunate. I had made me the perfect target, someone who did not deserve to live with the boys who thought normal. Whenever the opportunity arose, they dragged me to the back of the school and assaulted me brutally. If I tried to denounce, they threatened to turn their attention to my youngest brother, who had begun studies in that same institution. The college covered from kindergarten to the middle. I would not allow my brother to suffer anything like it. He became my only motivation to continue, though every day I felt more exhausted. My mother was living questioning my weekly bruises, and I invented countless explanations. The attackers were cunning. They no longer hurt my face, precisely to avoid suspicion. Despite everything, my brother was my source of hope. His joy always made me smile. He even started helping me by giving ointment in my injuries, wondering if those marks were not just the result of falls. I also lied to him, but knew that deep down he suspected. Once I got tired of being silent and tried to react. I was beaten in such a way that they no longer worried about saving my face. I invented another story to my mother, saying that she had suffered a robbery. The reality, however, was that my life became unbearable. It was during this time that I met two boys who also suffered in the hands of the same group. In discreet conversations, they confided to me that there was a output, a medicine that supposedly would just fall asleep without pain. It was the first time I really considered the idea of leaving. The days dragged on and the aggressions continued. We were exhausted, until one of them handed me the pills if I chose to take them. Curiosity grew, but I decided to wait. So days later, the news shocked the school. These two boys were found lifeless. The medical report indicated that if they had received immediate help, they would have been saved. The medicine weakened the heart gradually until it stopped beating. There was no farewell ticket. The institution mourned, but I knew the real reason behind it all. From that moment, I stared at the pill bottle every night, creating the courage to follow the same path. I started to hear voices in my head, calling me coward because I did nothing, saying that my existence had no value. Until one night, I made the decision. I went to school as if everything was normal, came home and hugged my parents after dinner. I told my brother how much I loved him. I waited everyone to sleep. Then I swallowed all the tablets, lay on the bed and closed my eyes. It was there that the most terrible of the nightmares began. The feeling was to have slept and suddenly awakened. But something was clearly wrong. My room was taken by a dense darkness that seemed to compress the air. At first, I thought the medicine had no effect. However, as I left the room and examined my parents' room, I realized that everything was different. There was no one. That was not paradise. I felt the fear overwhelm me. The floor seemed weird under my feet, and the air was almost breathing. I went down the stairs running, terrified. It was then that I saw several human figures in the room staring at me, as if waiting for me. There was something terribly dislocated in their smiles, disform and cruel. One of them approached, asking in a low voice, "Do you want to join us?" I felt so dread that my voice didn't even come out. When everyone started moving toward me, I panicked and ran away. I needed help, but I had no idea who could help me in that place. My mistake had been fatal. Their voices reverberated through the dark corridors, stating that I belonged to that place and would never escape. Other creatures seemed to laugh, eager to taste a new soul. My despair grew up as they imagined what they wanted to say with it. In a last attempt to escape, I ran out of the house, but in the garden, I noticed that more of those creatures were waiting for me. Are they people like me who also made the same decision? Or demons that stamped hungry? Tampered by terror, I drove on my knees. There was nowhere to escape. As soon as they realized my withdrawal, they advanced at once. I closed my eyes and for the first time in a long time, begged for divine forgiveness. But I was not worthy. I rejected the life that was granted to me and did not seek help to my problems. I was weak. Now I would pay the price. However, before those hands grabbed me, I woke up. I was inside an ambulance surrounded by paramedics. They managed to remove all the medicine from my body. I survived. My parents discovered the truth. The guilty of the aggressions were expelled. And in the new school where they ended up suffering from the same violence that inflicted me. I spent 2 years in psychological treatment. My story has changed completely. Today, I say to you all, don't repeat my misconception. What is hidden in this dark world is much worse than any trial here on earth. Good night, everyone. Good night, everyone. Still fearful of being tried for what I will reveal now, I ask you not to mention my name. I decided to share my experience not only to reflect on our decisions, but also because I feel that this is a way of confirming certain things I read in some books. Maybe it sounds insane, and if I hadn't experienced it myself, it would probably not believe it. I don't want to scare anyone, but something exists beyond this life, and I had the unhappiness to experience its darker aspect. I have always been in love with reading, and among the books that most release is The Gates of the Abyss by a little-known medieval author. As many say, this writer was one of the first to portray a place of eternal torment, separating it into specific layers, each intended for a type of transgression. I used to ask myself how someone could have described something so detailed without ever seeing. It didn't seem like mere imagination. At the time, I attended history at the university and met Patricia there. She approached me as she saw me reading this book, and in the blink of her eyes, we became great friends. We visited galleries, museums, and spent a lot of time together until our involvement deepened. However, it all started selfishly. I persuaded her to break with her then boyfriend to stay with me. He was older, someone I was unaware of, and I didn't care about the consequences. I recognized that she deceived him with me, and still knowing it was wrong, I couldn't resist. For me, if I really felt love, it couldn't be so bad. But in the heart, I knew his ex-boyfriend didn't deserve that betrayal. He always treated her well, but we decided to dive into that forbidden desire. Our affection has grown rapidly. I introduced Patricia to my parents, and she went to my house on weekends. Everything seemed to align towards happiness. One night we share our interest in exploring those infernal layers described in the book, questioning if they could be real. Now, looking back, I see how insane sounded, but we were both too involved in the idea, fearing the possibility of getting stuck in a dark place for all eternity. We didn't know, however, that this would open a dangerous port. Over time, our priorities have changed. I, who was not part of parties, started to go to her and her friends' influence, meeting very different people from me. I thought I was finally living and released myself from obsessive readings. My family said I appeared to be happier with Patricia, and I agreed it. It was dazzled. But everything broke on one night that would at first be banal. We went to the cinema in a late session. I don't remember the movie, but I remember that when we left, the mall was almost empty, with most stores closed. We walked hand in hand towards the exit when I noticed someone waiting outside. It was her ex-boyfriend. It was the first time I put my eyes on him. He approached us on a deserted street, drew a gun and pointed to me, shaking with hatred. I shouted offenses, saying that my end would arrive at that moment. There was no one nearby to intervene. In a movement, he shot. The shot crossed my chest. I felt life fade as he ran. Patricia shouted desperate. Some people tried to approach, but I didn't see anything anymore. Everything darkened. When I recovered the consciousness, I was in an arid, suffocating place surrounded by rocks. I got up quickly as I felt the soil on my feet. A thick liquid dripped from my chest, but the pain was almost non-existent. It was then that I noticed the noise of chains in the distance. I walked in that direction and found something that left me in shock. An endless row of chained souls being whipped by a heinous creature. Furious winds made them fall and burn in the lava that covered the floor. The scene was terrifying. I was in the second layer of hell described in the book, intended for people dominated by lust. Suddenly, I felt the presence of something behind me. A dark-skinned creature with a long tail and a macabre smile approached. "Where do you prefer the chains? In the neck, wrists, or ankles?" He moved, delighting in my dread. The other souls, consumed by the torment, shouted for me to be chained as well. I went into despair and ran out, but soon I was reached. The moment the creature was going to arrest me, I woke up. I was lying on the floor in front of Patricia and the paramedics trying to save me. I survived, but that experience turned me on. We reported the aggressor, who was arrested. However, our relationship did not survive. I don't know if I really stepped in hell or if everything was the result of trauma combined with my critical condition. However, the scene was so real that I doubt if I will ever surpass. I wonder if my destination is sealed or if that vision was just a warning. What if, in the end, we are all intended for something similar? I prefer to believe no. What I thought was a simple adventure in an unoccupied house has become my biggest nightmare. To this day, every inch of my skin creeps to recall events, or what could have happened. My name is Sueli, and I will tell you how I was face to face with death. My family has never had economic difficulties because my father had a good position in a medium-sized company, but they came from humble origin and fought for everything they won. My sister and I always had comfort. However, unlike them, I was rebellious. I loved being on the street and lived causing problems. At that time, there was only 2 months since I completed high school. The school where I studied went on strike, with no return to return. So, I decided to make the most of it, throwing myself on adventures with my friends who were as thoughtless as me. This is how the idea of exploring an old construction in the woods came about. In fact, more than a simple home, it was a mansion. Ricardo, one of my companions, said that rumors circulated that the place was infested by spirits of all kinds. He thought that seeing a ghost would be the event of the century. Marta, the boldest of the group, suggested recording everything with the cell phones to have evidence. However, most refused, afraid to attract some kind of curse. Although I didn't believe these stories, I preferred not to counteract the majority. Also, I never enjoyed supporting Marta's ideas for reasons that it should not be explained now. Getting to such a mansion was tiring. It was almost 2 hours of trail until we saw the construction. It was in a downgraded point of the terrain, hidden in the middle of the trees. There was no way to get by car. According to Ricardo, the house was over 100 years old. We entered with some ease as the door gave way with a simple push. Inside, the walls were taken by roots and heras that infiltrated the windows, corroding the floor. We used flashlights, although cellular light also helped. Our main goal was the second floor, where the old rooms were. We climbed the stairs and decided to disperse. I went alone to a room that still kept a bed and some apparently intact furniture, but I suspected that if I felt, everything would collapse. I searched the drawers for something interesting, but I didn't find anything. So I noticed that the window was sealed with wooden boards, already rotten by time. I started to rip off the boards without great difficulties. It was the worst decision I made. As soon as I removed the last piece of wood, I came across the window glass. I tried to push it to open it for good, but I felt something cold invade my mouth, as if it was a breath that filled me completely. I had never experienced such a strange feeling. Terrified, I ran out of the room. I found my friend Joanna in a neighboring room and told him what had happened. I trembled and decided to lie down in the hall, waiting for the rest of the group to appear. When they gathered, I began to feel terribly bad. An intense fever came out of nowhere. My muscles hurt so much that Ricardo had to carry me. I was sure something had infiltrated me in that room. I explained what I felt, but no one knew what to do. We left the mansion, and as we walked, Marta spotted a cabin ahead. He said maybe there was help there. For me, it made no sense. If the mansion was abandoned, that cabin would certainly be too. Finally, we decided to go to the road and look for some housing where we could ride to the hospital. It was at this moment that my fever got worse in such a way that everything was silent, as if the world had stopped. The only voice I heard said, "Her heart stopped." I closed my eyes, convinced that my time was over, but I woke up. Strangely, I saw my own body lying on the floor as my friends tried to revive him. It looked like my soul floated outside me, watching the scene. They raised me by the arms and legs, running desperate. I remember Ricardo Sobli saying that I was lifeless. As we walked away, I realized something that escaped from my mouth, the same stream of gelid air I had had before. As soon as that came out of me, I breathed again. I opened my eyes and said. When they heard my voice, they stopped, surprised to see me alive. I got up, still dizzy, and followed the rest of the way on foot. After we returned to the city, we report everything to the police. They claimed nothing to do, and as if that were not enough, led us from vehicle to our homes, explaining to our parents what we had done. That house, though abandoned, was private property, surrounded by walls and with a locked gate. We violate the place, characterizing invasion. They warned us that if we came back there, we would face the legal consequences. However, I didn't need formal orders to keep me away. Even after so long, I don't feel the slightest temptation to return. Thank you for your attention. Good night, Vinicius. Good night, everyone. What I will share now may not completely surprise those who know the reality of overcrowded arrests, but few know the details of what happens behind these cells. Perhaps, when the truth comes out, I am no longer alive. Or worse, you may have surrendered to evil, not to die. So I found a way to make this account cross the walls that confine me. I do not intend to reveal my identity or explain how I managed to send this story. I just want the world to know what to hide here. I came to stop in this place for an irreparable crime for both laws and God. I took a person's life. He was a nurse from a children's clinic. I just intended to steal his bag, but in the middle of chaos, my despair led me to shoot. I know my family is ashamed of me, which is why it does not appear to visit me. In the background, I prefer it. I don't want you to see what's going on in this hell and for a second believe that there is any trace of kindness in these corridors. When I was arrested, they shared me in a tiny cell with 8 more detainees. Among them was a gigantic guy, almost 2 meters high, muscular and intimidating. At first, I thought it wouldn't last a week near him, but I noticed that his attitudes were cordial, even friendly. It made me lower my guard. It was my first mistake. I tried to fit into the courtyard, approaching those who played ball or raise weight, believing that having allies would protect me. I didn't suspect how wrong I was. Many prisoners claimed to be religious and spoke of a good news that awaited me. At first, I thought they referred to faith, regret, but it was completely wrong. Over time, I noticed strange signs. My cellmate spent hours in meditation, murmuring phrases in an unknown tongue. He once stared at me and told me to never interrupt him in these moments. I thought they were prayers, a way to support that terrible place. Until, one night, a guard called me, asking if I wanted to use the bathroom. As the cells have no toilets, I accepted. As we walked around the hall, I witnessed something that paralyzed me. All detainees were sitting on the floor, with cross-legged, singing the same strange language. The guard pulled me away, and when we arrived at the bathroom, he whispered, "They made a pact." He explained that before he died, one of the prisoners told everything. A secret sect had emerged there, a profane cult that promised power and protection, demanding in return absolute devotion to an obscure entity. The man who declined to adhere was executed by his own cells. The guard warned me that I would be the next if it was not part. I told him that I didn't understand why I was helping me, and he revealed to be a Christian. He said he had already tried to change his prison over and over, but his request was always refused. "They don't want me to leave here," he murmured. I returned to the cell without being able to preach my eyes. The supposed kindness of those men now seemed like a wicked trap to entice me. My cell companion was not long to press me. He said he had arrived my time, that I needed to unite with the group. I immediately rejected, saying that it was repulsive. The man turned his countenance at the same time, becoming cold and evil. Before I could react, pulled a pointed object and hit me several times in the abdomen. The pain was unbearable. I faded, bleeding on the floor. The guards intervened and pulled him away from me. I was dragged to the ward, where I passed out. Guys, when I covered consciousness, I was alone. Strange, even weaker. I felt no pain and my wounds were simply missing. I walked, trembling, through the corridors. But what I found bordered on the nominable. The prisoners were unrecognizable. His eyes emanated a reddish shine, and the bodies writhing in an inhuman way. My aggressor was there, but it was no longer the same. His twisted face, his mouth dirty with blood, and there was another detainee beside him, devouring a corpse. I panicked. I ran desperate. But the corridors seemed to have no end. The shadows surrounded me, and the cold increased every step as if my soul was being frozen by terror. It was there that I understood. This place was a kind of purgatory, a dungeon for spirits marked by sin. Demonic creatures would feast with those who had no hope of mercy. The guard who tried to help me died days later, murdered by another detainee. I escaped, but only in body, because I feel that my soul no longer belongs to me. A new director has recently arrived, and since then the atmosphere has become more suffocating, as if something colossal was about to speak. I don't know if I will have the strength to resist, but it is certain that I will not sell my soul. I prefer to die to bend in the face of this evil. I ask God to have mercy on me and above all of my soul.